in terms of
We're,
hopefully missing
they're
the way.
okay right now, but we're anxious.
Okay. Some of your questions made me really think. Initially, I thought, oh my, that's a broad question. But then as I sat to think about it, it was very useful for me.
You're being kind, but they're very basic. Good evening. It's my honor and privilege to welcome you to this special edition of the BW Dialogue today. Today, we are discussing something that is in the air. Companies are getting listed. Companies are being acquired. Mergers and acquisitions are happening. Entrepreneurship is on the rise. The investments in tech companies is just growing. So, it couldn't have been a better time than to discuss the art of happy exits. Today, we're talking to Dr. K. Sri Krishna, who's been an entrepreneur. He's had 10 exits in companies. He is now a professor in residence or an entrepreneur in residence. He teaches a course at the Northwestern University on entrepreneurship and innovation. And he's recently written this book called The Art of Happy Exits in the context of buying and selling enterprises. So let me welcome Dr. K. Sri Krishna to the BW Business World Dialogue. Welcome, Dr. K. Sri Krishna. You joined us from Boston, and I want to welcome you and start by asking you, how have been the last 17 months for you, both personally and professionally?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Batra. It's a pleasure to be here. And just to clarify, many times this happens, especially with parents. I'm at Northeastern University and not at Northwestern University.
Sorry, that's why you're at the Northeastern University in Boston, and the Northwestern is in Chicago, right?
Indeed. Yes.
Let me clarify that right up front. It's a Freudian slip. The business school I went to when I was studying there had a tie-up with the Northwestern University, and two professors from that university even came to teach us. But let's move on with the BW Dialogue, and let's talk to you about how smart entrepreneurs sell their businesses, the art of happy exits. But before we get to that, as I asked you, how have been the last 17 months for you, both personally and professionally?
Yeah. So if I have to summarize this entire time in a single word, it would be one of gratitude. That is what spans both my personal and professional experience. Because again, having been an entrepreneur, and my wife will vouch for this, there's not a shy bone in my body. So I've always viewed myself as an extrovert who's spoken up, etc. And then to be confined over a prolonged period of time, largely at home, has taught me. First I learned about myself, at the right age of 55 plus, that indeed I'm capable of being by myself and capable of being reflective, and that I don't need constant stimulation, which would have been my self-understanding if you'd asked me pre-pandemic, what turns me on, what sets me on, etc. But the other side of it is during this pandemic, I have been teaching and I've continued to work with young entrepreneurs. And so the two things is, one, my students have really taught me a lot. So anytime we think, and again, in full disclosure, by every measure, my life has been one of privilege at every level, right? We can all tell sob stories as entrepreneurs. But when I look at what my students have been through and what a slew of other entrepreneurs have been through, particularly with the second wave in India, it is, I have not faced anything close to this. And so understanding what the reasons we have for being grateful has been brought to the fore. So to me, that's one part of it. The other part of it is, as entrepreneurs, it's very easy to get caught up because, again, I know, having done bootstrap startups, I have my hand out all the time. Many a time I don't have 3 days of cash and I'm wondering how I'm going to make payroll this coming month. I'm laying awake at 3 a.m., etc. Now, I'm sure entrepreneurs have been through the same thing, but yet, if you look at the WhatsApp group, we have a BHU. I'm an alumnus of Banaras Hindu University. We have a WhatsApp group in which every single day in April and May, people were asking for oxygen cylinders or what have you. And yet these same entrepreneurs turned around, pivoted not just their businesses, but how they spend their time and energy so that they could serve the communities, whether it's in Ghaziabad, whether it's in Varanasi, whether it's in Bangalore. So one part of it was gratitude that I was even among such people. The other part of it is the centrality of innovation and the assumptions and things we make, because I think people felt, okay, if others are not going to come through, it's my turn to get the job done. So that's something that I learned and I'm very grateful for.
Thank you, Mr. K. Sri Krishna. Now, let me ask you, why have you written this book and why now? And why about exits? You could have written about any other aspect of the entrepreneurship journey.
Yes, indeed. Good question, right? See, when people ask me what is a good time to start a business, my answer is always now. There is no better time to start a business than now. It's always my response to them. So similarly, when I sold my first business, that was in 2006, at that time, my best friend and a gentleman, another business entrepreneur, I used to walk every day, Ramani, he'd been running a manufacturing business for many years. And he saw here I was running the software business, which is clearly loss-making. And yet I seem to have sold it for what seemed like a pretty nice sum of money. So he was curious, hey, what did you do? Why don't you write about it? In a rare moment of humility, I felt, hey, do I really want to tell my story? But one of my pet peeves in all this time has been far too often, right? As entrepreneurs, to be successful, we must drink the Kool-Aid. But one of the Kool-Aid we drink in India, especially in Bangalore, is we think, oh, we are Silicon Valley. We are not. We are far from it, right? So there are many ways that we look elsewhere. And part of my fear was, and the media, with, of course, present company exempted, tends to focus very heavily on how much money did someone raise, how much money did someone make, etc. That's rarely the story. So what I wanted was this focus on fundraising or starting a business. And there's a little bit of a hero worship. I think, if you look at who do we put on the cover of our magazine this week, then you would think there are only 15 entrepreneurs in all of India, because we seem to constantly have the same faces recycled, if you will, right? So my thought was, look, everyone's focused on all the issues that are going on here. And of course, there's a whole slew of people. We saw this in 2000 when the internet took off, where people were wondering, like, what do I do about the internet? Then when mobile took off, people are going like, what do I do about this, right? And now you see whether it's delivery, whether it's two-sided marketplace, people are constantly thinking, hey, what do I do? So there's a lot of attention to where do I start? But rarely are we thinking, where do we finish? So to me, it was, this is an area that hasn't been addressed. Worse yet, when it's addressed in the media, it seems like, oh my God, everything just went fantastic. So-and-so made so much money. So it's like a Hollywood movie where the hero and heroine get married finally and they sort of disappear, but we don't see any of the mess that happens. How do they feel in the hotel the day after? Who puts their toothpaste where? What happened? None of that is shown. So my thought is very important as entrepreneurs, especially with more and more entrepreneurs. Even 10 years ago, entrepreneurship, or when people started, parents had a whole slew of concerns, etc. So my sense was, look, now that we've got one or two cycles of entrepreneurs starting things, we better pay attention to what happens at the end. And rarely is the end. It's often the new beginning. So that was the motivation for me to write this book. Reality is I wrote the book 2 years ago, but the pandemic delayed when it came out. So in that sense, the timing is about 2 years behind where we thought it would be here. But I think this is a story that's worth discussing. And that's part of the reason we are talking today. I'm afraid you're muted.
Exits are important, and they'll continue to, because in some way it's a validation of the business. In some way, entrepreneurs like to build businesses for creating value. It's a validation of that value. But is there while we'll come to specifics in the book and what you've written, is there a playbook to exiting a business? You talk about timing in everything in life, whether you play cricket, you play hockey, timing is everything. Whatever you do, even while you said the right time to start a business is now. For example, if you'd started in a SaaS business 2-3 years back in India, it was a great time. It's right now also a good time to start a differentiated SaaS business. So tell me, is there a playbook? Is there a playbook to exiting a business? Give us your inputs on that.
Okay, so in essence, that you asked two separate questions, and if you don't mind, I'll separate my answers. So question one is really, is there such a thing as timing, and is there a good timing to sell your business, right? So the answer is quite simple in my view. The right timing is when you're prepared. And that for some people, preparation may be a week. For other people, the preparation may be 5 years. In fact, these are the two extreme cases I handle in my book. So what is important, and we'll talk about what is being prepared and what is the playbook that you spoke about. So to me, while it's clear that you can always start a business at a given time, selling a business requires you to be far more prepared than starting a business. You know, regardless of how prepared you think you are to start a business, you will find out soon after you start the business, you aren't really prepared. So you might as well start now. But if you want to exit a business, and more importantly, be happy exiting the business, you need to be prepared. And so that brings you to the playbook, right? So for the playbook, there are two components to this. One is the people involved. So this in the book, I divide into two parts. One is yourself, and two is other people. And the other people usually is other people in your organization. That could be your co-founders, that could be your employees, that could be your investors. And then, of course, whoever is buying your business, the third party who's buying your business. So these are the two parties, yourself and others. And there are three clear steps to your business. That is, what do you need to do before you sell your business? And many of us, when we think about selling our business or exiting our business, we're really thinking about that process that you're going through, the middle of it, which is the negotiation, the pricing, what have you. And there is the after. What happens after you sold your business, to which we give very little time. So if you look at the two people involved, yourself and others, and the three stages of selling a business, the playbook is essentially these 6 steps. Having clarity on what you want and what you need, having clarity on what others want and others need before you try to engage in selling a business. Similarly, when you go through that during the process and after the process. So that is essentially the 6-step process is what I outlay in the book. And that is the playbook that I recommend. Of course, shameless plug here. This is the reason you should get the book.
Okay. Now, when I started reading the book, I came across something which was very basic, which was very philosophical. It said, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom.
Right.
Aristotle said that. And clearly, entrepreneurs, I keep asking this question, why are you an entrepreneur? Do you want to make an impact? Do you want to be wealthy? Do you want to be famous? And in some way, these two things are linked. And the exit is also linked to these things. So give us a sense of why did you say that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom in the context of happy exits?
Okay. So, there are 2 parts to this. One, of course, luckily, Aristotle said it before me. So I have shamelessly borrowed it from him in terms of this, right? And the reality is, I think, in our conversation, you mentioned many entrepreneurs become entrepreneurs by serendipity. So which means if you stop them and wake them up in the middle of the night and say, hey, why did you stop this? I don't think they'll necessarily be able to articulate. But the reverse also is true. If I overthink shit, then I'm never going to start. So N.S. Raghavan, one of the founders, who was the first angel to invest in my first business, told me a story where a young man came to him and said, look, I have this job offer from Infosys, but I'm thinking I should start a business, become an entrepreneur. What do you think I should do? And Raghavan told him, look, you should join Infosys. And the young boy was shocked. So he said, because he thought Raghavan's been an entrepreneur, so he would tell him, become an entrepreneur. So he asked, why do you say that? So he said, look, if you have to ask me whether you should become an entrepreneur or whether you should take this job, it's very clear you're not ready to be an entrepreneur. So you need to take this job. So part of it, he was just trying to shock the person out of it. But to your point, the reality is, regardless of what we start and why we start a business, very soon, and this is what I see with young entrepreneurs, right? They're usually single, let's say, people, when they get started, they haven't thought much, they think they can take the risk now. So suddenly they find everything from a parent say, this is an actual quote from a father telling a daughter, unlike your brother, at least you get a real job, right? So not very encouraging in one sense. And of course, your spouse.
But I think a lot has changed in the last decade, I would say.
Absolutely. But the thing is, everyone likes the thought of you starting a business, but then, when you're borrowing money, when you can't make payroll, when you're staying awake at night, then people want to know, or it's year 7. And then suddenly your spouses want to know, hey, what are you up to? So at this stage, it's important to sort of understand, why am I doing this? And by the way, we should also admit why I'm doing this can change over time. It need not be the reason I started. But what is clear is if you don't understand, so to me, understanding yourself is not key to starting a business, but to succeeding, even if you don't exit, or staying happy while you're running it. And most importantly, after you sell it, if you want to be happy, then you better be clear what is it that you want. And what is it that you want when you're a single person who's focused, let's say you're a technologist, then you're very much focused on technology, you love solving problems. But one of the lawyers I interviewed in the book said this, right? If you meet every person who loves cooking, every chef who's amazing, they are not a good restaurateur necessarily. Because what you find out is running a restaurant is not just about making good food. In fact, it's mostly about not the good food. I mean, good food is a given. So in all these ways, it's very important to understand yourself. What is it that you want? What turns you on? Why do you wake up in the morning? And in fact, many people who are not happy after selling their business. So you read in the paper, they made 45 million or they made 100 million. And then you don't even allow them. I mean, now it's a double whammy. If I made money, I can't even tell you I'm unhappy now because you're like, wait a second, you just made a boatload of money. What are you complaining about? But the reality is I can be miserable, and many times I am, because I don't know what I want, because I thought this money would make me happy. And unfortunately, every time I tell a young entrepreneur this, their feeling is, hey, you made your money. That's why you're saying this, right?
Yeah, but you done on the page 64, you do have a checklist on purpose where you ask precisely the questions you're talking about. What excites you and gets you jumping from the bed? What if you inherited a certain amount of money? What would you still do? So I think those fundamental questions need to be asked even in your journey of entrepreneurship. And you have a chapter on the accidental entrepreneur, right? I used to use the same term, but accidental sounds a little negative, so I started using the word serendipitous. Now let me get into the book right away.
Please.
Now you say right up front in the third chapter, you talk about a framework to sell. Take our viewers and readers through this framework.
So briefly, I think the framework is recognizing when most people talk about selling the business, and certainly when you read in the newspaper or in a magazine after a business has been sold, if you look at the details, essentially only the following details are provided. Who sold to whom for how much money? Pretty much that's the fact. And then if it's a public listed company, obviously there is shareholder approval involved, etc. So the reality is this is only one point in time, whereas selling your business is a process. So the process consists at the beginning, even before you've thought about selling your business, understanding what you want, which is if you don't know what you want, you're definitely not going to get. So if the two of us decide, hey, let's drive to Shimla, and we don't have GPS with us, and you say, hey, generally head over on this highway, national highway over here, we may not end up in Shimla, we may end up in Allahabad. So having very clear idea of, hey, what is it that I want? And again, in organizations, typically we see that not just the founders or not just the CEO or the CXO, but many times the value of the organization, especially if you're a tech business, lies in your people. And certainly in a service business also, it lies in the people, which is what do those people want? So if your team finds out that you're trying to sell the business, are they going to head for the hills? Are they going to run out the door? Or on the contrary, are they going to imagine they're going to make a ton of money and therefore put their legs up, and you don't have a business to sell by the time you get someone involved? So understanding what you want, understanding what your team wants are very, very important. And usually if you have raised any money, and that could be loan from a bank, that could be money you've taken from family, or that could be more formal money from an angels or VCs, then you better have a clear understanding what is it that they want, right? And again, many entrepreneurs don't pay attention when we all want, and by the way, when I say many entrepreneurs, it always includes me, right? So when I need to make payroll, when I'm going to borrow money, my father-in-law said, don't sign anywhere. Of course, I signed everywhere, right? Otherwise, who the hell is going to give you money, right? So similarly, when you raise venture capital, pay attention to the terms. We are also focused on what is the money. And all this happens well before you're trying to sell your business. So if your VC has double dip terms in their document, so if you sell your company for 10 million, they put in 2 million. They not only take their 2 million first, and then they take the percentage that they own, which means you need to understand what is going to happen when you sell your company in terms of the actual money. It's not the money you read, the $100 million that gets reported in Business Week, but really how much of that money is going to hit your bank. So these are things that you need to think well before you get started, because once you get started, it takes a life of its own. So in the second phase, you better have a clear plan. How are you going to communicate? Because one day your sales guy is going to come and tell you, look, this advertiser asked me whether we are trying to sell our business because they heard on the street that you're trying to sell your business. And if you don't have an answer for it upfront, so one, you don't want your sales guys to find out from the customer, nor do you want to lie to you, because the challenge with lying is you can't keep track of what you told to whom. So having a very clear communication plan. What do you communicate to your team? What do you communicate to the folks who are facing customers or partners or what have you? And more importantly, who will do the communication? And at this stage, again, don't be a hero, because regardless of how amazing you are, you have a stake in your business, and therefore you are no longer objective, which means you need lawyers, you need accountants who can tell you, look, these are the implications. There will be tax withholding. There will be capital gains in this manner. So these are things that you need to plan for. Again, one of the stories I narrate in my book is, in our business, we used to give our employees options. And only one engineering manager bought the options every time they vested. All the other people did not buy it except for the night before the sale. So what happened is the entire gains that they made was treated as salary in their hands, and they lost 1/3 of it to tax. Whereas the gentleman who kept buying his options as we went along, it was long-term gains. And so he had to pay only 10% tax on it. So rather than be happy on the day of the sale, like, whoa, we made a lot of money, they're like, shit, what do you mean I have to pay taxes? So in phase 2, understand what the stakeholders around you want, as well as understand what is a potential buyer going to want. This is very hard for you to do internally, because obviously this is your baby, you love it, it's amazing. And other people are going to tell you it's ugly, nothing's right with it, what have you. So this is during the process. Don't be driven, don't focus only on the money. Don't focus only on the excitement of the sale, but pay attention to the details of what do other people around you want. Now, let's say you're lucky and you get through these two things very clearly. You make a nice transaction. Let's say it's mostly in cash. Let's say it's a nice return for you. What happens the day after, the Monday after the sale? If the buyer is bought you and he's saying, hey, you need to stay on for 2 years, you don't want to be miserable for those 2 years. If on the Tuesday, your key VP of engineering, VP of sales leave, you're in deep trouble. Or, if you have hidden from them that, hey, you had a court case, and then they find out. So there's all kinds of things that can happen after the sale. So again, this is like a marriage. The movie doesn't end because you sold. The movie, a whole nother movie is starting at that point, which is how do you plan for the after? Again, understanding what you want. So now, prior to this, everybody came every morning with all the problems they had to you. They said, sir, what do I do this? What do I do that? Monday after, nobody comes to you. You're like, shit, never mind you got money in the bank, but you find out, wait a second, nobody's paying any attention to me. And if what really turned you on to be an entrepreneur was because people came to you with their problems, you love solving problems. But now there are no problems to solve. But you can't for the next 2 years do anything else. And this is the only thing you know to do. So that's what happens after the process, right? So recognize there are 3 stages: before, during, and after. Recognize there are at least 2 parties, yourself and others. But the others are actually 2 people. One is people within your organization, and 2 is people outside their organization. So your playbook should be, can I answer before for each of these groups of people what they want before, during, and after the transaction? That is a somewhat simplistic, but it's a good functional way to work, to be happy with your exit.
Good. Now, you talk about why do people sell? Give us what's in that chapter. Give us the motivations of why people sell.
Okay, this is very nice. It's a great question because it's related to your timing question as well, right? So when I said be prepared, so you can look at exits as one of 2 ways. One is anticipated or prepared for, and unanticipated. So let's look at the unanticipated first, right? Suppose I was not taking good care of my health and I had a heart attack, or I was in an accident because I went skydiving, I'm an idiot, or I dropped dead. So this is highly unanticipated, because if the business was all about me and what I brought and the leadership I presented, what have you, suddenly, my wife doesn't want to run this business. She's not even sure what this business is about. So if everything goes, and by the way, most entrepreneurs don't have wills, so please write wills. Okay, so there's not a big problem with it, regardless of how young or how old you are, right? So what happens is, there are things like death and disability, which can cause, which are unplanned, which are unpleasant. So we need not talk about it. But there's also, as you said, serendipitous, which is suddenly a customer says, hey, so I did not plan for it, but a customer said, by the way, this happened to me once, where a customer said, hey, I heard I'm afraid you might get acquired. So my response to them was, hey, maybe you should acquire us if that's your concern, right? While I said it partly facetiously, so that's the part, one part of it. The other part is the anticipated, which is you're saying, look, I took money from a PE firm, which means PE firm has a 5-year term, at which point, at the end of which they need returns. Either I should buy it from them and pay them, or I need to exit. So sometimes when you take professional institutional money, you've got a clock ticking from the day you took the money. So you have to plan for it. What does that mean? The other part is, I loved it. Again, one class of entrepreneurs find they love starting stuff. Once they prove the model, they don't really enjoy the growing part, because the growing part requires a different set of skills to be able to scale that model. So those who understand themselves well recognize, okay, look, I love starting, but I don't enjoy so much this. So then they plan for that sort of exit. The other is the serendipitous, where people come in. And then the third kind is people who plan up ahead, regardless of outside things. By age 50, I want to have retired. Therefore, I want to have to sell this business. And I want a return of 9 times EBITDA, let's say, or whatever it is. So they have a clear plan, or at least they have a clear set of goals that they want. So these are the, so in essence, as many entrepreneurs there are that many reasons for them to exit. But they can fall into one of these two categories, which is planned and unplanned. And by the way, you can have unplanned exits that end up being happy, and planned exits that can end up being unhappy. So this is not guarantee of happiness, but these are the reasons people exit businesses.
Absolutely. Now, I found this title chapter very amusing when I first started reading it. What's your monthly nut? So take us through this chapter.
This is very, very critical. Again, this is a direct quote from one of the lawyers I interviewed who works with lots of entrepreneurs. So very simply put, if I approach you, Dr. Batra, and say, Dr. Batra, you're running this business, I'm good at selling this business, and then how much money would you like? So what happens is, if you're a salaried person, you have some sense of, okay, if you look at most people, their biggest expenses are. So let me start maybe by defining, if you don't mind. So that way we keep it very, very clear, right? So the thing is, the monthly nut is simply put, how much money do you need each month in order to maintain your current and possibly future lifestyle? It seems very simple, and maybe we answer saying it's 50,000 rupees, or maybe it is 5 lakh rupees, whatever the number is. But then the moment you start digging in, especially if you're an entrepreneur, how much of your expenses are being taken care of by your company now? Is your phone bill paid by your company now? Is your health insurance paid by your company now? Is your car paid by your company? So once you have sold your business, these inflows are not going to be there. At least those are directly not good. So first, in your expense column, do you understand all the expenses today, regardless of who is paying for it? The moment you have a child who's going to go to school or college, the moment you have a child whose wedding needs to be done, and by now, if you're a successful entrepreneur, then you want that wedding to be big, which means, what about one-off expenses that you're going to incur, which are not monthly expenditures for you, unless you treat them as monthly expenditure. So suddenly what happens is, so when you ask someone saying, look, if you sell your business and want to maintain your current lifestyle, how much money do you need? And they say, oh, 5 lakh a month is plenty for me, let's say. Then you start digging in. The reality is there's a whole bunch of assumptions they have made, which they have not accounted for. Now we ask, okay, if you need to make this 60 lakhs a year, how much money do you need in the bank if you have no other income? Then you find out, wait a second, they are assuming 8% return. Maybe 3% return might be better. What about tax? What about capital gains? So suddenly you start clawing all of these, and people realize, wait a second, and the longer you have run your business, the worse it is actually. Because so much of what you're doing in your business, and especially in the Indian context, if you look at entrepreneur as in proprietor enterprises, so clearly this is very much intertwined there, which means you take it apart. So the moment tomorrow I buy your business, I go away. Now, none of those expenses are being met for you by that company. then what is the amount of money you need? So that very few entrepreneurs, by the way, about 5% of entrepreneurs know this to the nickel, to the dime, to the paisa, last paisa. But most others are so tied in emotionally and energetically with their business that they have no idea what it is. So part of the first and most basic reason you're not happy after selling your business is you think you made a good deal. Then you find you can't take your wife on that vacation you promised her after working 10 years that you would take her on, right? Because you just don't have the free cash flow.
Absolutely. So thank you for defining that. What are your monthly needs, and what is your ambition? I think they both come together.
Yes.
Sometimes the larger point you're making here is entrepreneurs of certain lifestyle. What is the number that funds that lifestyle? Sometimes
Indeed.
they need to factor the future. Now, you also talk about what happens when two startups merge. That may not be a buyout in the strict sense of a buyout. It may not be an exit in the strict sense of an exit. But give us a scenario of what you painted in your book.
Okay. So you bring a very important point here. Again, this is the reason I use the word exit rather than sale. Because exit can come in many varieties. An exit could be, and at least 3 people in the book, they did not make money. In fact, one of them actively lost money and still had debt and such after the business that they had to personally pay. But they were very happy, right? So the thing is, exit is not only a sale. And sometimes when the sale is forced and not necessarily of one's own volition, that is not necessarily a happy exit at times. So to come back to your point, this is a very good thing. And by the way, this phenomenon, especially over the last 10 years, now we started using the word acqui-hire, right? Either VCs go through a bad thing, they've invested in a bunch of companies, now they're like, what do I do? Try and sort of put them all together so that I can lump them, sell them. Or sometimes entrepreneurs have put together a business, now it's clear they can't make it happen. They see someone else is successful, at the very least for their employees, if they merge with them, right? So again, some of these same rules apply, right? If we leave money out, in fact, you'll notice in most cases, exit is not unhappy because of money. The beauty about money is you can count it and you can put a number on it. So you know oftentimes before you go into it, and you have reconciled yourself, even if you're not going to make money. So you're rarely unhappy solely because of money. But you're unhappy many times because your expectation and your assumptions are not being met. So in the specific case that you spoke about, when 2 companies come together, and especially when they're startups, the very things that made them semi-successful or successful or energetic as startups is the fact that they did a lot of things from the hip. They were very dynamic. They got off together. So the personality. So what are each of the founders going to do in the new startup or in the merged entity is something you need to talk about. And again, this is not very comfortable for people to talk about. And many times, if they don't know themselves, they don't know to even articulate that this is my expectation. I mean, whether it's as silly as I will also have a corner office, or my business card will look the same size, or we'll both be called co-CEOs. So from the simple things of titles to what is the role to, and by the way, this is the same problem that you have with co-founders. If you don't clarify the roles of co-founders, the easy part is the titles. Either you get around the title problem by saying everyone will be called the same or no one will be called something. But you still haven't made it clear. So if my finance guy has a bill that's bounced, who does he go to? Does he come to me or does he come to you? Earlier, if I was the CFO, but in the new entity, I am called the chief marketing officer, I need to know to say, hey, that really needs to go to Dr. Batra. So in terms of the co-founders agreeing and clarifying, and in some cases, the right place for a co-founder is to leave the business. As in, it's right for my employees, but it's not right for me. In fact, this is one of the stories when we talked about Bhaskar Ethirajan in the book. I think one of the key insights he learned after the fact is, look, I should have stayed 90 days and not 6 months or a year, because I was needlessly costing the company money. I was being unhappy and I was making the other people unhappy as well. So I think these sorts of acqui-hires, in whichever way, when people come together, again, it all comes down to step 2 and 3. What do I want? What do others want? How do we talk about it plainly?
And the next chapter is about purpose. And you talk about that purpose matters, and it does matter.
Right.
But let me now get into, because when you're selling or exiting, there's an external party. So
Yes.
Your section is titled What Others Want.
Right.
Because you cannot create a fit if you don't understand the need. And the best chapter, according to me, and as an entrepreneur, I enjoyed reading was, finding your company's fit,
Right.
which is pre the sale. One is during the sale, but if you identified an exit strategy for your enterprise, then who is the perfect suitor for you? Who's the perfect buyer for you? So that also ensures that you can get better value, if I may use that term, or get a better
Absolutely.
deal, get better fit. So give us a sense of, then you have a chapter called, investors need exits.
Right.
Sometimes exits are determined by investors because while you enjoy running the business as an entrepreneur, you're passionate about that. Investors are in it for a certain time period. If a fund's time period is 5 years or 10 years, they
Right.
would look to close the fund and make an exit. So first of all, tell us about this chapter 11, which is about investors need exits. And then I want to talk to you about this chapter 12, which is about leaving McDonald's. I again like these chapters, but my favorite chapter is finding your company's fit, which is the 18th chapter in the book. So let me first get you into uh, why investors need exits and how to deal with that.
Absolutely. So let me take that first one. See, as you rightly pointed out already, Dr. Batra, investors are in it for the money. And more importantly, they're clear about it. So I think it's very important, just like when you try to serve a customer and you try to understand the customer's needs, what is the problem that the customer is trying to get solved, and how can you serve them? When your investors, in one sense, when they invest in your business, they have customers that they have limited partners and others that they're accountable to, for whom they need to provide returns. And by the way, this is not a secret. They're open about it. And it behooves you as an entrepreneur to understand what is their investment thesis. So one part of it is exactly what you said, Dr. Batra, which is the timing. But the other part, which I think entrepreneurs don't understand, and I think this is very important, and this is what happened with the story that I share in the book is understanding their thesis, which means in a certain type of investor who's very clear, look, we want to be the first investor, we'll make small amounts of money, and we are looking for medium-sized returns, which means we don't want to raise lots of money, which will dilute the probability of what you will make. And we can also rotate that money faster. By the way, you can say, hey, that's a stupid thesis, but doesn't matter. That's their thesis and it works for them. So you need to understand. And so when you engage, you are also interviewing your investor. I know I've been there. We are desperate for the money. And if someone wants to invest in our business, we are happy. But I think that's the time you need to step back and to learn about these things. You need to do it before you take their money. And you don't want to find out about it after you took their money. That is, what is their investment thesis? When are they thinking of exits? Have they done exits with other companies? What exits have worked for them? And talk to those entrepreneurs. Are they happy with what happened there? Did they let the entrepreneur? So by the way, this is a very practical thing. And this has nothing to do with your exit. Remember, we're talking about doing all this work before you raise your money from people. Just like with your bank. If you borrow money, you want to understand the terms. When is the bank going to want the money back? And in what form and shape? So similarly, your investors expect money back. Unlike your bank, their expectations are much bigger than your bank's expectation. Your bank is saying, okay, if you at least return the money you borrowed, plus interest, that's great. So understand their investment thesis, understand their timelines, understand the domains that they're in. And all this you need to do well before you are considering an exit. But the moment you are considering an exit and you understand their thesis and you've already taken their money, have this conversation with them. Set expectations. Just this last week, I've had two different people ask me questions. One asked me the question, how do I, my angels are constantly asking me about my exit. What do I answer? So that's one set of questions. So you need to be prepared for that. The other, the same week, I had another entrepreneur ask me, I want to talk about exit to my angels. They don't seem to be talking about it. They don't seem to be concerned about it. How do I bring this conversation up to them? So these are things best done before you consider doing it. So that's really understanding what they want and how they want to do it. And by the way, there will be many answers. There isn't one answer. For example, some people want an exit. It's entirely possible that they could partially exit when you raise even more money in another round. Think about that, right? And that whether that's some of your employees who've been here. So if you look at it, many businesses have taken longer. By the way, Dr. Batra, again, Businesses that seem to do well suddenly and are getting lots of valuation are in the news. But reality is there's a whole bunch of businesses that started 10 years ago that raised VC money that haven't exited now, that are all looking like, hey, what do we do? How do we do, etc. So this is the other part. So that to answer your question, understand what your investors want well before you take their money. Continue to talk to them so you understand their thesis and their timelines, and put yourself in their shoes when you're thinking about an exit, and don't spring it on them, discuss it with them. You're muted, Dr. Batra.
Again, you have a chapter 15, which is getting your house in order, which is about making your company investable. In a lot of cases, having a succession plan, having a CEO, having a team that will stay beyond the exit. Now, let me shift to my chapter, which is favorite chapter. I was going to ask you, what's your favorite chapter out of the 27 chapters? When 27 chapters is a summary, 26 chapters. But it's finding your company's fit. To me, that is a very critical chapter. And how do you find that fit?
Okay, so when
because you've done it 10 times. You've done it 10 times. So you clearly were talking to somebody who's not only
personally done it, 4 times I've been in the front seat, but 6 times I've been either an investor or a mentor at the table, which in some sense is a little easier because you're not as emotionally vested. Of course, it's more frustrating also because people don't always listen to your advice. I mean, they rarely do.
Yeah, sure, sure.
But you're able to be objective. So to your point, so there are 2 aspects here, right? One is, like an arranged marriage in India, let's be very clear, there is a fair degree of unknowns, what they call information asymmetry. So your job when you try to exit a business or when you're trying to get married is to get as much information as you can upfront. So the way to do it is do your homework. Don't look at the money, don't look at things. So for example, when I did my first exit, the investment bankers brought 36 prospects to the table.
36.
Yes, we didn't meet all of them, right? So right off the bat, we were able to, we took a lot of meetings. So to your point, preparing yourself means when I'm taking that meeting, I'm not meeting with customers. I'm not, meeting with bankers to raise money. I'm not meeting with my engineering team. So recognize sometimes selling your business is a full-time business, can be a full-time project, which means you better have somebody running the business while you're out there doing it. Because oftentimes you, either as the CEO or as the founder, might be the best person to hawk and bring that passion to selling your business. So coming back to finding fit, so you cannot find fit if you do not know you and your company, yourself first. So make sure you're not smoking something and you're not making assumptions about your own business before you try to find out the other business, right? So if I'm dating a girl and I tell I never lose my cool, I'd be just lying, right? Or what upsets me or what have you. So it's important and it's a precondition that you understand yourself. The second part is ask the other party what is important. Of course, and the reason you do it is they would, like you, again, even if they're 100% truthful, there'll be many things about themselves that they don't know. So in an ideal case, if they've acquired other companies, meet the CEOs or people from these other companies who have stayed back so that you get the word from the horse's mouth, if you will, which is, talking to people who've been with them, who work for them. Simple things you can observe. How many people of past acquisitions are still with them 2 years after, 5 years after, 10 years after? So that tells you, look, was there a good fit or not? How many companies have they acquired? How many of those companies' products still exist or are they all wasted? So my very first employer was National Semiconductor. It was an amazing company. They bought 25 companies in the time I was there and every one of them failed. Whereas if you look at a Broadcom, they bought at least 30 companies over the last 10 years and every one of them has prospered. That still doesn't mean, it's the right company for us necessarily. So when you talk about fit, look at, have they retained their people? What do they say, and what do they do? Talk to people they've already acquired. Look at their ads. Talk to their, if you can reach their other customers. Because many times when you sell somebody, they're probably in the domain that you're in already, which means you've encountered them at customers. You've encountered them at suppliers. Talk to them. So when I go to a company shall remain unnamed, but let's say I go to a company in India I'm in their lobby to talk to them. I see all these wonderful posters saying what amazing things they are. Then I find out they don't pay their vendors for 120 days. That tells you something. Pay it. Of course, if you are one of those guys, maybe it's a marriage made in heaven. But if you pay your employees or your customers in 30 days and they're paying, not paying their vendors in 120 days, then there's a flag. Either you say, look, I don't care about that. So if you are interested and if you want to find out, you can see all of these. They'll be evident. And the way you do it is, it's not detective work. You read, you talk to people, you listen carefully, you ask them pointed questions. And the other final thing is ask the same question in several different meetings to several different people from the same company. Do they give different answers? So these are all very good ways to know, because the issue for you rarely is, even if you leave and there was a good exit for you financially and otherwise, you will not suffer. But the poor people who went to work for you and who believed in you, who bought into your vision, if they are left over there and treated like crap, that's not a good place. And you will not be happy regardless of what you think if your people are not happy even after you leave. So these are some of the things I would recommend you do in order to determine fit.
Thank you so much. Let me ask you my final two questions. One is a larger question not related to your book. In India, it's a season of IPOs, and the valuations are really huge. Some people believe it's a fool's rush. Some people believe it's 2008 is waiting to happen, a dot-com bubble. So this time the consumer tech companies are creating value. There's no question to the value they're creating, and they're valuable. It's the quantum of their valuations, which some experts are questioning. What is your point of view on the valuations of consumer tech companies in India?
Okay. I'll try to give you a concise answer. Notice, even in the last two words of your question, you said consumer tech. And recently I had a VC whom I know well, respect, regard well, etc., told me, oh, they're not really in the delivery business. They are in the AI logistics business. Okay. And being a polite person in that meeting, because other people were involved, I did not engage and argue and disagree. So one thing is in India, obviously to me, food delivery as an example, and by the way, I'm not picking on any one person one way or the other. I certainly am not smart enough to understand why it would bear this valuation. So there is anytime anyone tells you it's a black or white question, we are the land of Advaita. So we should be non-dualistic. So my response is, look, tech firms of a certain kind clearly create value, where the thing is, if the people weren't there and you sold the asset, is there still value? So that's one way of looking, is there underlying value? So the simplest way for me to answer the question, there are a bunch of people even 30 years ago, in fact, a very good friend of mine who's very successful, thinks even 30 years ago and today that all stock market is jua. So he doesn't want to gamble. There's one element of that. Then the other part of it is, look, there's an old way we've looked at books. Do they deliver? So whatever that, if you look at the P&L, if you look at the balance sheet, etc., which means will it continue to deliver value in a certain way? Answer is yes, that hasn't changed. This is like saying mobile or internet or delivery. Babies are still born in 9 months. Fundamental laws of physics are not violated. So I am somewhat skeptical about some of these valuations, because like with all rush, like mental health right now, I'm seeing there are many multi-billion-dollar mental health firms, even in the US, which makes no sense for me right now because they don't yet have a revenue model. They're not anywhere making the sort of money. This doesn't mean you and I get in and out.
A path to profitability. It is not so much about profitability, but you need to look at Amazon. If you looked at Amazon 20 years back, its valuation, if you look at it, it seems perfect. But at that time, Amazon had a path to profitability. Some of these companies, at least visibly, don't have a path to profitability.
So I think like everything else, Dr. Batra, here it's buyer beware, right? The thing is, if I don't understand, I stay out of it. Luckily, you asked where you started this meeting at the beginning, how has the last 18 months been? Fortunately for me, the last 20 years has told me, look, don't worry about, saying, oh, what if I bought Facebook at this price or Google at this price, is the certain way to be unhappy. I think being in the present is the best way to be happy, in my view. So clearly, many people have innovated in business models. Many people have created new customers who are buying who otherwise would not buy. In that sense, they've created value. But is that value worth whatever $1 trillion, or is that value worth because investors have put in money and now they need to get their money out? And there's always a bigger fool. Unfortunately, I think there's always been a bigger fool. So if there is no clear path to profitability, I tend to avoid it. But I am no stock market wizard. So you should be very careful listening to anything I say.
My last question. The book is called The Art of Happy Exits. Tell me about exits that haven't happened. Are you likely to write a book on what goes wrong in an exit or what can go wrong in an exit? Because sometimes exits have gone terribly wrong. And I know of personal situations. And I'm talking of very large companies. I'm not talking of entrepreneurial young companies. So give us a sense of what to avoid when you do exits. So how do you get a happy exit? If you had to say top 3 things to get a happy exit, what would those be?
Okay, I will answer the last part first, and then I'll answer about the unhappy stuff. So to me, having a happy exit requires 3 things. Plan. All the 3 things are planned, right?
But let me ask you, like when you see you have been a leader in the wireless stereo business, you sold a business from that company. How did that exit happen? Give our viewers and readers a sense. Why did you decide to exit?
Okay, excellent
in a very
question.
Short span of time.
Yes.
In a very short span of time.
Understood. So anytime you do new technology, there's lots of opportunity created because the market is very fragmented, many players enter. That's what happened when we started our business. But as the marketplace matures, people at both ends of the marketplace start buying up all the people in the middle. Or sometimes people in the middle start nibbling and buying everything else so that the market chain consolidates. Because even though the market has grown, for the number of players who can be successful and large and profitable shrinks. And the way they shrink is by acquiring everybody left to right. So in 99, when we started, Bluetooth was going to die. Everybody said it's never going to happen. Then the market crashes, blah, 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 blah. By 2005, it's amply clear Bluetooth is not going to die. It's amazing. It's growing at a rapid pace. But when we started and we sold our first license, it was at $250,000 a pop, $250,000. By year 3, it was $25,000 a pop. By year 5, people wanted it for free. So 2 things were happening. Market was consolidating and value was getting accreted elsewhere in the value chain. So we now had a choice. What do? Do we exit the business and try to capture some value? Or do we become one of the big boys by acquiring everybody on either side of us? So being young and foolish, we said we'll try both. So on one hand, and the reason we want to try both is if I'm coming to you, Dr. Batra, and say, buy my business, and you say, hey, buzz off, I should act at the table, not desperate, but I got a plan B. So my plan B was we set up a subsidiary called Hippo Lifestyle Systems in Singapore, saying we'll enter the headphone market, the end consumer market, the market where our customers, Logitech and others are playing. Because in case they aren't, because my customers are saying, hey, I'm concerned, I'm buying technology from you. If you get acquired, what will happen? So I'm telling customers, acquire me. But on the other hand, I see my customers are also buying stuff. They want source code license. So they don't need to buy from me in the future. They want to be independent. So this was the situation where we said, hey, what do we do? And then when we looked internally, when I started my company, my peers were all 23. I was the old guy at 34. Now they were all married. They had their first wife, first child, first house. They're like, shit, what do we do? And we've had to take pay cuts many times. We didn't pay salary many times. All this stuff had happened. So when you put these factors together, it turned out, look, and our customers were asking us, so it told us there's an opportunity here. We hired an investment banking firm who had done 2 deals within the last year in our domain, and they were value-based. They brought these 36 people to the table. We shortlisted to the 9. We got 4 people to the table. So we did many things right. Some of it, thanks to our investment bankers. Some of this, we listened to the advice of others. And that's how we finally... So the best fit would have been a large company, but we were really scared with how they negotiated. And initially, we were foolishly focused only on the total quantum of money. So we went to the company we loved the most and said, if you meet this money, we will sell the company. They said, we can't meet it, but here are our terms. We loved their terms and we realized we hadn't thought about terms at all. So we went to the next company on the list, said, here are our terms and here's the money we want. And they came through, we went with them. So So understanding what we are good at, understanding what our customers wanted, getting a lot of options on the table, having a plan B. And more importantly, we were very open and communicative. We told our team, look, we are trying to do this. We're not trying to sell and get out because we want to bail. And you know what? This may not happen. So we better have a business that we continue to run. And every employee had stake. 67% of the company was owned by the employees. So everyone made out good in this. I don't know if that was short enough.
So much. You had a chapter on the serendipitous entrepreneur. I think exits are serendipitous too. That's the point I want to make, that sometimes as you said, you may not plan for it. Sometimes they're planned exits. So we wish you luck. I think a lot of entrepreneurs in India would welcome this book. I would recommend it to all the entrepreneurs. So thank you so much for writing this book. We review this book, and our conversation will be on the BW Disrupt YouTube channel and BW Business World YouTube channel. We look forward to more interactions with you, and we'll involve you in our entrepreneurship initiative so that you can guide the entrepreneurs that are associated with us. Thank you, Dr. K. Sri Krishna, for writing this book, The Art of Happy Exit. And clearly, as an entrepreneur who started one business, acquired another business, I've still not exited from any business, nor have an intent, but it was an interesting perspective. And thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you for the conversation with us. We look forward to staying in touch and collaborating with you on maybe workshops that help in exits, maybe getting you to guide entrepreneurs in India on how to assess whether they are ready for an exit or not. So thank you so much. It's a great book, simple, anecdotal, and has a roadmap. So I would encourage this book be read by all entrepreneurs who have some kind of thoughts on exit in their mind, or they have exit on the anvil. Thank you so much again to the author, Dr. K. Sri Krishna, for writing this book. He's a professor at the Northeastern University in Boston. I got it right this time, and I look forward to more interactions with you in future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Batra. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. Thank you all.